thank you everyone for giving up your time. I'm looking forward to share some of these thoughts about regenerative design and timber. And I hope that you'll find this topic fascinating, and also there will be some learnings hopefully coming from this presentation. I also just want to apologize, it's not a good start. I just want to also do an acknowledgement to the traditional owners of the lands and waters that we live and work on across Australia and also across the world. But specifically, I want to give my respect to the Wadawurrung. This is the country where I live on, and thank you for sharing this beautiful country of yours for where I live and work, and many of our other peoples that's on this lands. It's really important to acknowledge the systems and the knowledges of our Indigenous peoples across the world. This presentation or this lecture today, I'm pulling from the source of a recently published book, Regenerative Adaptive Design for Sustainable Development. This book brings forward a regenerative worldview where bringing together all the collective complexities that we need to consider. And fundamentally, as part of the book is that the message is that we as humans are part of nature. We can co-regenerate and co-adapt with nature, but we're not above nature. But then it's a very complex statement, if I can say that, but how can we bring this into the context of future development and us looking after the earth too? So it is available at that link from Springer. So if you want a bit more of the detail, and some of the content of the book will be on a high level be discussed today. I want you to look at this image and just for a moment in silence, think about what you see. It is quite phenomenal, isn't it? This is our planet we live on, and we really need to look after this planet. Now, what is interesting is Ian McHarg, that wrote a book in the 1960s, Design with Nature. In his chapter, The Cast and the Capsule, he referred to another picture of the Earth, and it was one of the first ones that's been taken from space. It was a black and white one, but he paraphrased Lauren Isley, and I want to use these words to give you a bit of context. And while you were looking at this picture of planet Earth, just listen to the words that he paraphrased. And for me, it's quite fascinating. This has been said, been raised in the 60s. And what are our thinking now in the 21st century? So Lauren Isley's words are the following. Man in space is enabled to look upon the distant Earth, a celestial orb, a revolving sphere. He sees it to be green from the verdure on the land, algae greening the oceans, a green celestial fruit. Looking closely at Earth, he perceives blotches, black, gray, brown, and from these extend the dynamic tentacles upon the green epidermis. These blemishes he recognizes as the cities and works of man and asks, is man but a planetary disease? Indeed, as recognized in the early 1960s and now in the 21st century, this disease is very obvious, and I refer to this as our biggest global issue, the disease of rapid urbanization and the decline of our rural areas, and also the change of land cover. So our IPCC report that's recently been released, it's quite interesting that what it said about land cover changes, and I want you to really take some attention on this. It said since the early 1980s, about 60% of all land cover changes have been associated with direct human activities, with spatial patterns emphasizing the regional character of land use and land management including tropical deforestation, temperate afforestation, cropland intensification, and the increased urbanization. So this is a major problem. And this global issue of rapid urbanization continue to destroy our renewable sources on Earth. But the question is, why do we have this major problem? We've got this major problem because from the 20th to the 21st century, our planning, design, and construction of the built environment has been unimaginably bad, reckless, and unacceptable. The way we have built our cities has resulted in a degeneration of the Earth's natural systems, now eventuating in unprecedented impacts of a changing climate. And a little bit attention to the last few words is we have pushed beyond the planetary boundaries. It's very interesting. These words are raised by Alexander 2006. I changed a little bit in my work in 2020 and 21, but Rockstrom's work on the planetary boundaries was recently featured in this Breaking Boundaries documentary. To understand what our planetary boundaries mean, I recommend you to watch this recent documentary released by David Attenborough and the scientist Jan Rockstrom, titled Breaking Boundaries, The Signs of Our Planet. And it's very important to understand what the planetary boundaries mean. The planetary boundaries framework developed by Rockstrom served as the structure for this film, where Rockstrom details the impact of our anthropogenic change to the planet, and also where we stand in relation to the irreversible tipping point for each of these planetary boundaries. Now, the irreversible tipping point is a very important phrase that we need to look at. And as David Attenborough, no one else can, as well as he, give that message to us. And I really recommend that you watch this documentary. But what are the 9 planetary boundaries developed by Rockstrom and his team? Rockstrom and his team identify the boundaries of resource use that can keep the Earth system stable. So this research showed these 9 resources, if they've been kept stable or they've been intact, our planet will stay stable and it will support life. So in their planetary boundaries model, 3 processes have been already exceeded their stable state. And I just want to highlight, this is the results were reported in 2009. And these include, these 3 that exceeded their stable state was climate change, biodiversity loss, and the interference with the nitrogen and phosphorus cycles. But quite interesting, recently, the 4th process that exceeded its stable state is the change in land use. And that is where change in land use is due to our urbanization. And this is pushing our planetary boundaries way beyond its capability, as well as, if you think of it, because of urbanization, suburban sprawl, we use more resources, we destroy the natural systems, and also this is where deforestation happening at a rapidly rate. So it's really important to understand what these planetary boundaries are and how we can work within this context. But you maybe argue, well, we do good things. Our current state of affairs are not so bad. And that's understandable because sustainability is happening all the time. We refer to the current state of affairs as a sustainable development that's happening. The word sustainable is applied to basically every aspect of our modern world. It's in economics, it's in business, in social structures. We got sustainable agriculture, sustainable fisheries, forestry, politics, and the environment. In essence, it's the attempt to achieve a balance and the permanence in the world. So we even know about the Sustainable Development Goals that's been put forward by the United Nations. Yes, globally, lots are happening, are done in the terms of sustainable. But the question is sustainability enough? The fundamental underlying principle of sustainable or keeps things sustained is where we actually currently in practice, we settle for causing the minimal damage. It's still about not damaging the ecosystems, but it is keep things just at a sustainable state. So sustainable is then not really the answer for continue growth and regenerate our Earth systems and looking after the planet. So on further investigation and deeper investigation about the sustainability state of the world or what we do, it actually came up what McDonough said in 2011, and he referred to sustainable practice or sustainable development that is actually only 100% less bad. So because of that, we need to move beyond sustainability, beyond the current thinking of sustainable development and the way we just keep the status quo sustainable. And this is where we need to move regenerative, adaptive thinking into regenerative design. So to become regenerative, this means that we as humans must be part of nature and evolve further. So I will just spend a little bit of time on this diagram that reflects how we need to move beyond sustainable mindset and sustainable thinking. Now, if you look in the middle here, it says sustainable. It's about restoring, and that dotted line is sort of at the point where we degenerate things and systems of nature, or we can move to a regenerative system. Now, be sustainable and below it is really still part of this degenerative system. The reason is because we just reduce impacts on nature and it is 100% less bad. Whatever we do, we still take resources from the earth to sustain a sustainable state. What we have to do is move above and go up with the spiral to a regenerative thinking, not just restoring but regenerate our systems, and also move then further to a regenerative adaptive context, what I call evolutionary state, where we as humans then become and participate and act as part and evolve and adapt with nature. That is this top area that is really important. And this is where regenerative design comes in. Regenerative design helps us to moving beyond the sustainable state, but become part of a regenerative state. Really what nature is doing. Ecological systems always regenerate and create life or create conditions for life. That is what our planet is doing. So why not becoming part of that process? But you maybe say, Phil, that is quite a big task. Well, the first thing that we need to do is we need to change our worldview. In the recent declaration of the climate crisis by 11,000 scientists in 2019, and most of them were Australian scientists, they noted that to secure a sustainable future, we must change how we live. This entails major transformations in the ways our global society functions and interact with natural ecosystems. Now, how can we do this? This is where we need to change our worldview of a global consumerable society to a society that have a worldview of that everything is holistic and integral, and we want to improve things. And this is where an integral design worldview come in. Integral theory, as was put forward by design theory forward by Mark Decay in 2011, where he he noted that we have to look at the different context of how we look at different perspectives in our design thinking. And it came to the 4 quadrants of the objective context. It's like the right-hand side of this diagram, or to the subjective context is the left side of the diagram. And here in the middle, you see it's I, it, we, and it's. It's about all levels at all scales and perspectives that we look at the integral worldview. So in essence, an integral design worldview is at all levels and perspectives that includes ecological thinking and the acknowledgement that we as humans are part of nature and not above nature. So I'm going to use this integral design worldview to go through how regenerative design and how the use of timber is part of this thinking, and we're going to address it at each quadrant in the integral design worldview diagram. Just a bit of more to put context on it. In this diagram on your upper right quadrant, we look at the behaviors perspective. The left right quadrant, we look at the systems perspective. The left lower quadrant, we look at culture's perspective, and the upper left quadrant, we look at experience perspective. So to go first into the first quadrant, and I want to start on that one because this is what I think we all do and know. That is the objective section of it. It's the things like buildings and subjects, and it's normally these quadrant that we focus a lot in whatever we do, if we apply even sustainable design, so forth. On the second one we're going to look at is it's going from the singular building or our objects to the more systems perspective, and that is where we will look at the bigger things where it's holistically connected. And for example, you look at that little diagram, it's the trees and the mountains, but the whole natural system or other systems collective. And then in the third one is this one on the left-hand quadrant. It's about our culture's perspective. How do we see this from a global society context? And then the last one is our fourth quadrant, is that subjective experience from I. It's me as a person. So let's explore this a bit further. So if we look at the first one, this is where we refer to maximize performance. That is the things like materials and energy and water efficiency and so forth. We, in a context of regenerative design, we want to achieve zero emissions at building scale. We want high performance buildings. This is where we look at net positive water, energies, materials, and ecology. And to achieve that is going beyond green design. And here, the terminology we use is living buildings. And in the context of regenerative design, the living building challenge is undoubtedly the leaders in this space, because it's known as one of the hardest certifications to get. And I want to use the reference study, the Te Kuraware in New Zealand, because this was living building, this was a living certified from the Living Building Institute. And why I'm using it is because of the context. It wasn't only this right-hand quadrant that they dealt with about sustainable design and energy efficiency and all of that, the materials, but it was also applying things that address the right lower quadrant of systems perspective. It was also addressing the left quadrant, lower quadrant of the culture's perspective, and the building automatically achieved the personal experiences. And that's where I later will come and discuss even biophilic design, how this addresses it. So you could see from an integral design worldview or the process, you go beyond what we're actually only doing now in that right-hand quadrant. But let's look at maximizing performance. what happened with this building? The baseline was set at 0, and this is very important. It's not that we need to achieve less energy use or maybe 30% reduction in carbon emissions, or okay, only 30% potable use or 10 potable water use. It is net zero. That means zero water, potable water use. 100% of your water collected is used and discharged on site. Potable drinking water is that rainwater collection is treated and it's used there. No potable water from the pipe outside the property. Net zero energy imperative. That means 100% electricity supplied by PV panels or other renewable energies on site. But through daylight use, passive design, solar hot water systems. This is in New Zealand. We know it's cold there, but this has been achieved. Net zero energy use from the grid. Now, on other living building challenge projects, there's many that require that it must be 105, 110% energy use or energy imperative. That means net positive. So you have to put back energy and you start to regenerate then, in essence, the systems around. Another important aspect is this red list imperative from the living building challenge, and no project must contain any harmful materials or chemicals. And this is especially very hard. So avoidance of concrete and steel was really important for this project. And how they got it right is by innovative structural design of timber beams and the extensive use of timber. And I will get, you later will see why I'm really pushing the use of timber, because it's not just about construction and so forth. It's a renewable source. It starts to link into this holistic context where we look at all 4 quadrants. So what could we do in our built environment to actually help us thinking on a global scale, where we start to look at our planet rather than just using the resources from our planet. Part of maximizing performance is it's net zero carbon. So to reduce the embodied carbon footprint through locally sourced produced materials, and one of which were timber is really used from FSC certified forest. But what's quite interesting to achieve the net zero carbon is that they didn't just buy carbon offsets, they rather invest in local projects. And interesting, in a lot of local projects that's to do with forestry. So this holistic thinking is what is important. So it really achieved a true living building enhancement through habitat enhancement, healthy environment through the healthy air imperatives, biophilic imperative. And what I highlight here is that the indoor healthy environment that's achieved for this building is through the extensive use of timber. And later I'll show that how important it is, because we always think timber use in the context of sustainability, but not in the context of health and well-being. And where our inherent connection to nature is so much to trees and materials from nature, where timber is one of the easiest solutions for us to bring that into our built environment. But I'm jumping ahead here, we're getting back to it a bit later. They also look at the very responsible footprint. As I mentioned, they did not buy carbon offsets, FSC certified, and acquired the chain of custody from suppliers for appropriate sourcing native timbers. And for those of you that's in the timber industry, you will know that this is quite difficult. And yes, I know we're doing all this good stuff in Australia and all over the world, but why I would like to refer this project, New Zealand is far from everything. And it is very difficult to get materials, first of all, to avoid a red list according to the challenge, but then also to be able to get a chain of custody certificate from your suppliers. So the commitment of the team and the people help to do this. And this is where, for me, it helped to support this vision or this proposition I put forward, a worldview where we start to need to take care of our planet. Above and beyond, the two will also ensure that forests are managed responsibly, culturally aligned, taking care of plants and animals and people. And that's quite interesting. I'll come up with a quote again. And this is not just about forestry or timber use. It's about also, when you look at these forests, you not just manage them responsibly, but you take care of plants, animals, and people. And that is go beyond sustainable forestry. It goes beyond the bigger context where your viewpoint is that everything is interconnected. Now, this brings me to the next quadrant, the lower left quadrant, where it is about the collective. And this moves then us into the systems perspective. In the systems perspective, we refer to it in an integral theory as guide flow. Why guide flow, or guide the flows? Is the flow of energies and minerals through nature. It's not the energy that we get through our power line. It is the energies that flow, that make things work in this world. It's the energies of life. And this is where, when you put it together in the collective, you guide this flow of regenerative and sustainable thinking. So it's in essence a systems thinking, a collective systems process. It is in essence evolutionary, because it look at the whole and it continues to improve. And this is the quote that I mentioned earlier, and I want to come back to it. So I just extracted from the project. It said, a focus of tour is to help ensure that forests are managed in a way that not only takes care of animals and plants, but of the workers and communities who rely on these forests and the Indigenous people connected to these forests. So you could see now we start to talk about a bigger system, not just achieving sustainability or performance at the building scale, at the building, but sits in that first quadrant on the right hand. But now we're looking at the collective one of the left hand. So guide flow through ecosystems. When we want to guide the flow of energy and regeneration, this is where regenerative forestry comes in. The key here is the context of the bigger ecosystem, where sustainable forestry can focus on only some aspects of an ecosystem. Regenerative forestry, or also known as close to nature forestry, will look at the bigger picture or the whole system. When you practice regenerative forestry, your bigger ecosystem go beyond the forest. It look at regenerative forestry principles that are doing the following. It's about conservation of local and regional diversity of fauna and flora. It's not just about the forest. You look at enhancing genetic diversity in local ecosystems for evolutionary developing and adapting to climate change. So in essence, it's just going back and say, what does our original forest do? So if we do regenerative forestry, can we mimic this and make sure that it support ecosystems? And this is where the thought point I say, support local ecological networks and interactions. And local means not just, again, in the footprint of the forest, but how does these networks work on a bigger ecological and ecosystem scale. A key aspect for regenerative forestry too is protection, the protection of restoration of the natural soil fertility and structure. And this is something that is very important, because that is where most of your greatest diversity of ecosystems happening, of ecology happening, where that soil fertility support way beyond just the trees, the forest, and the plants. It support microorganisms, it support insects, it support a whole ecosystem that helps for regenerative of that place. That place is that forest. That forest sits in a region. That region sits in a continent. that continent sits in a global biosphere, and it's that global biosphere that is currently in trouble because of human-induced climate change. So this is why the regenerative thinking is so important. It's that links, I call it levels of scale. And if you know ecological systems and ecological theory, it talks about these levels of scale. It goes from the biosphere right down to the minute molecular element and how all of this work together. Then the next one is probably where you all think of, or not all of you, apologies, but this is where we look at our production of timber. Now, when you look at regenerative forestry, your sustainable production is not just about a sustainable production of timber, but it's about how to produce and use renewable resources in the production function itself to maintain that soil fertility, to result in a continuity of the naturalness of the forest ecosystems. Naturalness means if I walk in a Otway forest down here, there's this naturalness about it. And this is where Christopher Lexamer referred to the patterns that inherently impact us and let us love nature. So what is that naturalness? Can you do this with your forestry practice? And then the maintenance of this natural energy and mineral cycles. And this is where we talk about the regenerative design. You guide the flow of these natural energy and mineral cycles. Well, coming back straight to home, I would like to just highlight it because there's the misconception that our forest in Australia is totally getting destroyed and we're using too much timber. But this is quite interesting that I find about native forestry in Victoria. And this is supporting sustainable forestry. And I wish or I propose that we need to think, can we go beyond just sustainable forestry? This is good what we do, but how can regenerative forestry help? But this is very interesting fact for us. So a local example of sustainable forestry is that our sustainable, renewable, certified local Victorian hardwood timbers come from a very small area of Victoria's vast native forest estate. Vic Forest harvests and regenerates approximately 3,000 hectares per annum of the multi-use public forest for hardwood and timber, which is only 0.04% of 7.6 million hectares of total Victorian native forest area. So harvesting these forests, and a sustainable forest, don't get me wrong, when we say native forest area, it's not the Otway forest or protected forest. There's about 47 or just percent of protected forest. But this is equivalent of 4 trees and 10,000. And also what's very important, every tree that's harvested is regrown by law. And the Victoria hardwood forests are managed for timber production, are independently certified, and it's supporting our global sustainable forest management system. A very interesting point, and for me, it's really good to discover this. And I want to say thank you, Alistair. He made me aware of it because I think there's a misperception that maybe we destroy all our forests, but this is sustainable practice that we need to do. And think it in a regenerative context, it's a renewable source where, for example, aggregate in concrete and bricks is not renewable. When you dig that hole, you create that scar on earth, you can't fix it. Where when you take timber, you can grow it. And if you do sustainable management, you'll harvest trees that's in the growth period, and you actually continue with a cycle to help with our climate change. So this is where this renewable source to combat climate change, it helps us that we only need to use renewable sources. The IPCC stated in context of climate change, a sustainable forest management strategy aimed at maintaining or increasing forest carbon stocks while producing an annual sustained yield of timber, fiber or energy from the forest, will generate the largest sustained mitigation effect for the impacts of climate change. A very interesting statement. So sustainable timber is one of the only true, excuse me, renewable resources in the world, and hardwood timber products continue to store carbon for the life of that project. So if it's doing this, why are we not embrace this more? Because I think it helps us to think in a regenerative thinking. So using timber structures rather than other structures results in touching the earth lightly, resulting going beyond sustainability and support regeneration. And touching the earth lightly is a term that I think is really important, because when you use timber and you for example, in the place of concrete slabs, you touch the earth lightly. And this is where Glenn Murcutt, we all know Glenn as an Australian architect that really looked at how important it is not to impact on the environment. And most of his work is about touching the earth lightly and the use of timber. And if we look at the project in New Zealand that got a Living Building Challenge, using that timber help us touch the earth lightly. So let's go to the next quadrant, the left lower one. This is where we need to think now about our cultural perspective. I want to refer back to the 2 words of the project, where that last bit of the sentence was saying, we not just only take care of the animals and plants, but of the workers, the communities who rely on these forests, and the indigenous people connected to these forests. Now, if you understand indigenous thinking, you will understand the connection to the forest or to nature is not just about resource use, or it's actually not at all about resource use. It's about the deeper cultural and spiritual connection to place. And this is where an integral design thinking we refer to, or in the worldview, we refer to manifest meaning. This is where that manifest of the meaning of the things we do result in things. That brings us to the context of relationships to nature as the regenerative ethics that comes up. Our cultures become regenerative, and respect and indigenous knowledge systems. And again, this is very clear. This image shows you how the community and all those meaning of what that whole project is for the community comes together as part of applying the indigenous knowledge systems of the Tao. So manifest meaning in indigenous knowledge systems is really important for us. In the recent media release by the Australian Institute of Foresters, following the IPCC report that we received recently, the IPCC report, as you know, was an urgent calling for urgent action to climate mitigation. Indigenous forest management was raised as part of the solution by the Australian Institute of Foresters. And I just extract a few sentences from this media release. It said, more investment in forest science and forest managers and the right policy settings would enable us to implement active management approaches required to conserve and restore resilient forests and carbon stocks. A key path to achieving this lies in working with Indigenous Australians. We must respect and embrace the knowledge and experience of traditional owners and participate in the two-way capacity building to implement forest-based solutions to mitigating human-induced climate change together. And for me, that last sentence is actually beautiful, because what this is doing is really supporting that left quadrant of the integral world thinking, because it brings us to it is nature loving. Because when we look at solutions to mitigate human-induced climate change, that means we look at systems to start to look at how our culture becomes loving nature. This is again a manifest of the meaning of all the stuff we do. So when we look at the culture of nature loving, that relationships to nature means is the acknowledgement of importance of natural world for our survival. Our regenerative ethics is about understanding of regenerative requirements and ethics to support a regenerative future. So this is where, if you remember the original diagram, we participate as nature. We're not above nature as human beings. Our regenerative cultures, we become a culture of regeneration, and not only minimizing impact, the current status quo, we're going beyond sustainability, beyond less bad. But that's really important. And this becomes of our worldview, our cultures, and how we think we need to do things. And then the last one in manifest meaning from the whole regenerative paradigm perspective is respect. So we will respect nature, other cultures, and embrace indigenous knowledge systems. To, let's be honest, these systems that knowledge is there since more than 50,000 years old, and worldwide we start to recognize and that a lot of these practices helps to sustain regenerative context in nature, but also is maybe solutions for climate change. Now, because of a culture of nature loving, that means I have to do something about it, or it will address, it will touch me, it will impact me, it will be part of me, but of you too, you as an individual. And this is where we come to the upper left quadrant in the integral worldview. And that is about the individual. It's subjective, it's about I, it's about me, and it is how do I understand and experience this, and what can I do to better in the environment for me as an individual. In that quadrant, we refer to this quadrant referred to where we engender experience. So you need, it's not just about that system. We do sustainable stuff. Yes, good. We net zero carbon and all of this. We do really good things. We look after the environment. We do positive things. But this is where, and we build a culture that's caring for each other. But this is where we engender that experience. This is where that you benefit to it too. And I purposefully didn't start with this quadrant in the beginning of the talk because I think we got a very selfish world. A lot of people think just about themselves, and we tend to have that. It's human nature, but it's better to say, okay, let's look at the holistic picture and then get to ourselves. But there's another saying too in Japanese, that's Kenzen Nichino. It's examine the area around your feet. That means you as a person needs to do good things, because that will influence the path that you walk. So this brings me to environmental phenomenology, biophilic design, the experience of these cycles, and our bioaesthetics. And bioaesthetics and biophilic design result in things that create that awness, that wow factor. For example, this picture, it's phenomenal to experience the culture, but you also experience the energy of the building. So what we then do in this quadrant, when we engender experience, we create a sense of well-being through these elements. And I'm going to go a little bit deeper into biophilia and biophilic design, what it means. And this is very critical aspect as part of the bigger picture of wholeness, of that regenerative thinking, and of this worldview of integral context where we need to bring everything together. What is biophilia? Many of you heard the term, but in essence, biophilia is the innately emotional affiliation of human beings to other living organisms. Innate means hereditary, so hence it is part of our ultimate human nature. Be interesting to note here, this definition, it's not an emotional affiliation just to nature, it's all living organisms. And this is where the biophilia effect is not just about a green pot plant in your house or a nice garden. It's about everything working together. That's those little animals, those little insects, that's that soil in the forest, that's the whole system. because that we are ultimate this nature. And that is why the biophilia hypothesis is really a lot of empirical evidence and research show that this is important for our health and well-being. Destroying the earth systems is in essence impacting our context of biophilia. Now, how can we bring this into our built environment? We do that through biophilic design. Biophilic design is the practice of design and planning places that seeks to create good habitat for people as a biological organism. Interesting, we talk here as an organism. That means we talk as part of nature. And this biophilic design helps us to bring those principles of biophilia into the built environment and how that enhances then the health and well-being. Now, to do this, it includes the application of biophilic design patterns. Biophilic design patterns is the fundamental application, or biophilic design patterns are the fundamentals of creating healthy, livable places that enhance well-being. And these include 16 patterns. I'm not going to go through all of them, but why do we refer to patterns and not principles or attributes or guidelines? Because patterns in nature is dynamic. And when we look at biophilic design patterns, it means it's not a static element, but it's stuff that will enhance our psychological and physiological well-being. So it is a pattern that we apply, and it is also based on the thinking of Christopher Alexander's pattern language, where he identified these many patterns in the built environment connecting to the natural environment that actually enhance our acknowledgement of place and let us feel good in certain contexts. So that's why patterns is really important when we apply biophilic design. So in this diagram, I just want to bring out pattern number 9. And why? Because it's about material connection to nature. And it shows the key benefits. And this is where timber comes in. So pattern 9, what is the design pattern? That's material connection with nature. It is how material and elements from nature that we use that through minimal processing reflect the local ecology or the geology or materials to create a distinct sense of place in your built environment. The design criteria that it comes to a healing environment, and not it's just there, is that we need to consider the richness of the material colors that's from that material elements from nature, the warmth, the authenticity, the tactility throughout the internal and external environments that we will design or what we use in our built environment, and the use of exposed timber or timber finishes extensively throughout the internal and external areas. Now, this is not just thumbsucks. There's a lot of empirical evidence and research done. And this is part of a few projects I'm involved with, and this is guidance that we put forward. When you apply this, there is definitely health and well-being outcomes for these built environment spaces. In scientific terms, we say it's the biological responses, and we look at it from a physiological and psychological perspective. But what happened when you will apply exposed timber or timber finishes extremely throughout internal areas, combined with maybe patterns, geometry, other elements, not a smooth glass or steel structure, but there's stone, there's the natural elements that you can bring into your finishes. It will result in the following, excuse me, decreased blood pressure that improves comfort. It reduced our plasma cortisol levels. It increased your heart rate variability. It increased self-report calming effect. So through a lot of studies, it shows that it really calms us down. It increased cognitive performance. So maybe if you had a lot of timber around you and plants, your attention to this talk that I'm talking so much, your performance and your cognitive concept of what's happening will be higher because of your environment. It improves immune function, and observed material preferences is very come forward when you look at this, because that biophilia effect, the innate connection to nature, is coming through when you use it. So just in closure, so there's last one, or there's various studies that indicates that use of timber indoor and outdoor built environments substantially enhance health and well-being of its occupants. So in closure, this is from Christopher Alexander's Pattern Language, and I mentioned him before. He said people need contact with trees and plants and water in some way, which is hard to express. People are able to be more whole in the presence of nature, are able to go deeper into themselves, and are able, or somehow able, to draw sustaining energy from the life of plants, trees, and water. And for me, if I look at this, this is that quadrants we're talking about. That flow of the energy is there. That context of going deeper into ourselves, the left bottom quadrant, the culture context, and the left top quadrant, is that we start to understand and feel, and physiological and psychological have better quality experiences. And we also are more whole in the presence of our environment, because we understand that our right-hand quadrant, and on the top and the left bottom one, right top and right bottom one, look at all those systems. So we understand that we are able to look at the more whole presence of nature. It's more regenerative and help us to look after our planet. Thank you.
Amazing presentation, thank you. I thought I knew a little bit about sustainability, but it's taken my mind to a whole different place now with sort of regenerative design. Some amazing concepts there, so thanks for that. We've got quite a number of questions. We probably won't get through them all today, so I'll try and come back and answer those people's questions later on when we can download them afterwards. Actually, somebody was asking about the emphasis around recycling now and circular economy. You didn't touch too much on that at the moment, but how does that fit into your concepts here as well? Because that's such an important thing these days, particularly with timber.
Yes, Alistair, it's quite interesting. When you look at the circular economy, we frame it still in the human perspective. So it's the circular economy, it's about our urbanization and how we, as our products for human use. But if you look at recycling context, the whole of life cycle, and in a regenerative context, that means our circular economy becomes, or our circle process of recycling becomes evolutionary. So it's like what you recycle and what you don't use actually become then net positive. So it's net positive waste, where it means the waste becomes usable, or it's been even been putting back into nature or into a system that generates life. So yes, that's very important. But what I would say is, when you look at it from a regenerative, adaptive context, is we need to, I know this is maybe leaping totally, but it's go beyond the circular economic context of human use. It needs to go on what is that context of be able to regenerate ecosystems and regenerate life. Hope that helps.
Yeah, no, thank you. Miles mentioned here about, you said the timber can store carbon for the life of a product. Do some of the environmental accounting approaches these days consider that storage of carbon even after it's harvested, or how are they approaching those now? Do you know?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you look at whole of life calculations, you look at the whole of life storage of that carbon. But if you only look at life cycle analysis on the life of the project or the product, it address that product, but not the whole life of the product and this entity as part of the project or the whole entity. So yes, they when you do a whole of life, that's where I refer to whole of life thinking, goes beyond just whole life cycle calculations. It's more about the whole of life of the product and beyond that product itself. It is it's a very challenging area, by the way, to see how we could move beyond the standard practice we do now. Because in the context of sustainability, yes, we do all of life calculations and so on. But what about when you look at it needs to become regenerative, and that would be very challenging.
Yep. So I can't believe we're almost up to the end of our hour. We still have a number of questions, which I'll certainly pass on afterwards. But that was absolutely an amazing presentation. And we thank you very much, Philip, for your time today and putting that together, and for all the people attending today. I do remind people that the webinars are recorded, and I'm sure lots of people will want to go back and re-listen to all that wise advice you gave and to let their colleagues know about it. So I remind people, just go to the Wood Solutions website. In a couple of days' time, this webinar will be uploaded. Click on the resources tab there, and you can go to the webinars that are there. Look, in 2 weeks' time, on the 31st of August, we've actually got a presentation around our AS 1684 residential timber frame construction standard. So part 2 was actually re-released just a couple of weeks ago with the 2021 version. So we've got 3 presenters, all experts in the areas, talking about the changes that have occurred. So if you do residential framing, this is certainly a webinar that you can't miss. So we remind you about that in 2 weeks' time. So thank you, Philip, once again for a fantastic presentation, and thank you everyone for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks.